everyone. My name is Rose Chiachi, and I'm the Executive Director of the Pike County Public Library. I'm here today to tell you how to sign up for a library card. If you're a Pike County resident, it's really easy. You just stop by with proof of residency and a photo ID, and we'll get you all signed up. If you're not a resident, it's also really easy. You can just stop by with a photo ID, and for $35, you'll have full access to all of the library resources. Unfortunately, right now, our buildings aren't open to the public, but you can still sign up for a library card on our website, www.pcpl.org. Whether you're doing research for a project or looking for some inspiration, we can absolutely help you find what you're looking for. A really cool thing about libraries is that if we don't have the item that you're looking for, we can find it for you, no problem. We have a huge network of libraries in Pennsylvania and the entire country that we can borrow from on your behalf. Please check out our website, www.pcpl.org, for all of the virtual opportunities we're offering right now, or give us a call with any questions. Finally, I want to thank everyone from Peters Valley for bringing these great programs to our community and including the library. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the program.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Brianne Rosner, the Gallery and Craft Fair Director at Peters Valley School of Craft. I'd like to thank the Greater Pike Community Foundation for making this program possible through the Richard L. Snyder Fund in partnership with the Pike County Public Library in Milford, PA. Tonight, we are joined by Kimberly Winkle, and she will give a presentation about her work and then at the end answer your questions. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button, and you can just put your questions for Kimberly in there and we will answer them after. So Kimberly Winkle is a maker who creates furniture and objects using wood and paint. Her work displays a balance of form, color, and surface pattern. She has exhibited nationally and internationally, including SOFA Chicago, Wanted Design New York City, and the Architectural Digest Home Show. Her work has been included in a number of publications, including Fine Woodworking, Woodworker, and Woodworker West magazines, and the books 500 Tables, 500 Chairs, Fine Woodworking Design Book 8, among others. Winkle has completed several artist residencies, including the International Turning Exchange at the Center of Art and Wood in Philadelphia, the Wingate Artist Residency at the State University of New York, Purchase, Haystack Mountain School of Crafts, Vermont Studio Center, and the Appalachian Center for Craft. She has been awarded 4 niche awards, a State of Tennessee Individual Artist Award in 2011, and the Society of Arts and Crafts Boston John D. Mineck Furniture Fellowship in 2014. Winkle is a professor of art and director of the School of Art, Craft, and Design at Tennessee Technological University. She holds a Bachelor of Fine Art in Ceramics from the University of Oklahoma and a Master of Fine Art in Furniture Design from San Diego State University. Her workshop teaching experience includes Haystack Mountain School of Crafts, Penland School of Crafts, Aeromont School of Arts and Crafts, Anderson Ranch Art Center, the Center for Furniture Craftsmanship, John C. Campbell Folk School, the Appalachian Center for Craft, and Peters Valley School of Craft. So welcome, Kimberly.
Thank you, Brianne, for that nice introduction. I am Kimberly Winkle oh good, there we go. Start my video. Okay, hey everybody, hopefully you can see me up there. I am Kimberly Winkle, as Brianne said, and I'm really happy to be here tonight. And I just want to thank Rachel and Brianne for inviting me and for organizing this. I think it sounds like a really wonderful program, and of course the library for making it possible. As Brianne said, actually, did she say I'm originally from Oklahoma? I'm born and raised in Oklahoma. And you can see the photo of me on the right side, which is an illustration of my curiosity that I've had since a small child. Really interested in a lot of different things, pretty adventurous as well. In this particular instance, I was really curious about my grandmother's undergarments. She babysat my sister and I a lot when we were very small. And I remember being fascinated by that giant bra and putting oranges in it and trying to understand how it all worked. So that sort of curiosity has extended over into my creative practice, which I am going to share with you tonight. So I attended the University of Oklahoma for my undergraduate degree. It's a really large institution. There's probably about 25 to 30,000 students at the University of Oklahoma. It's in Norman, Oklahoma. That's where I earned my Bachelor of Fine Arts degree in ceramics. I really enjoyed working in ceramics. The material is so seductive because of how malleable it is. I also love the range of works that can be created from the material that ranged from small utilitarian objects to large sculptural objects. Then the variation continues through different firing processes, glazes, and it was just a really wonderful material to work with. I enjoyed working in ceramics and started with smaller scale, more decorative vessel forms, and then became really interested in working in a sculptural large scale format. So while I was an undergraduate student at the University of Oklahoma, during the summer, I took a class, a welding class at the local vocational college. I was interested in building these larger scale sculptural objects that the material of clay alone seemed to not be able to realize due to the structural limitations. So in that process, I was starting to work a little bit more in kind of furniture forms, suggesting furniture with combining materials of clay and steel together. So when I graduated college from the University of Oklahoma, I selected my graduate program a number of ways. One, I was very mindful of cost. I was looking for an institution that was affordable and that would provide to me some sort of financial assistance. So the school I ended up attending immediately after graduating undergrad was in San Diego. So I attended San Diego State, and I loved living in San Diego. I loved attending San Diego State, and I started the program in ceramics. Now, as I was just mentioning, when I was finishing up my undergraduate studies, I was starting to explore larger scale sculptural forms that combined steel that was starting to lean towards a furniture format. An example is I would weld together this metal cabinet and then attach from that metal cabinet ceramic appendages, ceramic forms. And so even though I moved to San Diego to attend graduate school in ceramics, my second semester that I was there, I took a class with this woman. All of my classmates, my peers in graduate school, had told me that I must take a class with Wendy, that not only is she just a dynamic person, they also saw the work that I was creating and thought that my work would grow and be better informed by having had the opportunity to work with Wendy. So I took a class from Wendy during my second semester of graduate school, and I fell in love with the material. I really enjoyed the process. I really enjoyed the sort of methodical, strategic way of going about working in that particular material. And I guess Wendy saw some potential in me, and she was very encouraging of me to continue to take woodworking classes, to the point that I ended up changing my concentration from ceramics over to woodworking. It was a really tough decision for me because I felt committed to ceramics, and I also felt committed to the faculty in ceramics at San Diego State, Joanne Hayakawa and Richard Burkett, who were wonderful instructors, and they really guided me a lot in my ceramic practice. But they realized that I was really interested in this material. They supported me in making the decision to change over to woodworking. And I have not regretted that decision at all. I was reluctant because I thought, well, you know, I came to school for ceramics. I should stay in ceramics, but really I went to school to learn. And I had just not had access to furniture making prior to that second semester in graduate school. So I switched over to ceramics. And I'm sorry, I switched over from ceramics to furniture making. And because I did not have a strong technical background, like many of my peers in the graduate program, it took me an extra year to complete the program. I had a lot of technical catch up to play, and fortunate for me, I was surrounded by some incredibly gifted makers who were very generous with their knowledge and time as well. So over the course of the next 3 years, I gained a lot of knowledge and inspiration, not only from Wendy, but also from my peers and classmates. So Wendy, I think, is quite remarkable, and she's just a force to be reckoned with. She's a prolific maker, but one thing that really stands out to me about Wendy is how she's able to utilize a furniture format to an expressive end. So not feeling confined or tethered necessarily to traditional forms of furniture, instead using maybe the metaphorical potential for the format, using the material as more of a sculptural object, using the material as another form of a canvas on which to make marks and to apply color and create these interesting forms that are a celebration of craft and a celebration of expanding the potential and boundaries of what a format can be. So this is an example of Wendy's work. Here's another of hers. This is her Mickey Mcintosh chair, which most people who are familiar with furniture and craft history would be very familiar with this form. So she's doing her version of a Rene Mcintosh chair. And then I've also been very inspired by her through her use of the furniture format as a way to explore history, explore identity. In this particular body of work, she was exploring her Japanese heritage. More recently, she created this body of work, which is the tag project. So she's created these individual tags that represent each of the individual Japanese Americans that were sent into internment camps in the mid-century. You can also see on the right-hand side, she has these horizontal cabinet forms. So she's utilizing traditional woodworking techniques, but towards an expressive and sculptural end. So when I was in graduate school, she challenged us as students and graduate students to expand our knowledge, expand our technical understandings, and to learn how to justify and defend our choices. In that process, she would also encourage us to gain information from other artists and other makers. This is the first piece I made when I was in my intro to woodworking class. Our first project was to make a vessel. So I carved this piece of jelutong. Jelutong is it's a soft wood, much like basswood. My experience with working with clay and understanding the plastic three-dimensional form was very helpful in carving that body form at the top. As a child, I always thought I would be a visual artist or a physician. My grandmother, whose brassiere I was wearing in previous images, was a secretary for a surgeon, and she'd bring home these books from the office, and I just love to pore over those books, and these books of, you know, like bodily disorders and you know, substances that ooze from the body, and they were just really, really interesting to me. And so I was utilizing that interest in medicine and the body and the viscera to create this form. You can see how even at this stage, I was very interested in the surface, that I didn't feel the requirement to celebrate wood in its natural beauty. As it stands, jelutong is a pretty non-distinctive, has a non-distinctive pattern, isn't terribly pretty on its own. So utilizing layers of paint, scratching through, sanding through, and applying other materials on the exterior to evoke bodily relations and functions. This is a work from my senior thesis exhibition in graduate school. It's a 3-year program. The culminating experience is our master's thesis exhibition, where we write a written thesis and we defend the work in an oral review. I was really inspired at this time by forensics, like piecing together of little vague bits of information to kind of put together a story in one's mind. So I built this mahogany cabinet. You can't see the base, but it is attached to an old office chair that I welded onto like a post. So this is suspended over that. So it's sort of this filing cabinet meets magnifying glass, microscope, all at the same time. All of the little fragments in there are totally made up, but they have like a case number, an article number, with the idea that the viewer can interact with these objects and piece together in their minds their own sort of story. So also at this time, I was trying to grow my technical experience. And so what I tried to do was to take on the challenge of a new technique with each piece. So in this particular case, it was not only carcass construction, but also working with material I hadn't worked with previously, which in this case is Formica and aluminum. So my experience in undergraduate school of taking the welding class, becoming familiar with metalworking machines was very useful to me in the creation of this piece. So everything is sort of quasi medical forms, but just, inspired by medical forms or forms you would see in a laboratory, but made up versions of them. So this is a wall hung cabinet that's long, and that magnifying glass can slide across the width of that cabinet. It's illuminated from behind through the use of a fluorescent light. You can see how all the little bits and pieces work together. And then I was able to revisit my ceramics background, and I got labware, and I created plaster molds and poured porcelain versions of the labware. So creating this sort of laboratory environment as though somebody was just working here and they stepped away for a few minutes. And the table, even though it looks soiled with dried, poured out liquid, it's actually a table that I constructed brand new, but wanted it to appear as though it was heavily used. Again, my experience working with ceramics was really useful in understanding the three-dimensional form. Although ceramics for the most part is an additive process, working with wood is a subtractive process and is far less forgiving in my experience as clay. With clay, if you cut something off by mistake, in many cases, you can reapply it fairly easily with some slip, scratch, the surfaces and put them back together. With wood, it's a little more involved. So while I was in graduate school, Wendy always encouraged us to learn as much as possible and to become familiar with the broader field of studio art furniture. So when I say studio art furniture, what I'm referring to is furniture where the idea of expression is paramount to maybe tradition or even function. So this is not artwork that is a period reproduction. These are uniquely designed and constructed pieces of art. So one of the furniture makers that I was very much inspired by and with whom I was able to study, I took a workshop one summer at Anderson Ranch Art Center. It was a 2-week-long workshop. Anderson Ranch is in Colorado. And I was really lucky as a student. As a student, I was eligible for a lot of scholarships. And I jumped on any and every opportunity that I could to grow my knowledge and to grow my experience through opportunities such as workshops. Peters Valley has a wonderful scholarship program that I would encourage folks to take advantage of. It's a wonderful way to gain knowledge, access to new knowledge, new perspectives, and really great people at the same time. So I took a workshop from Tom Lozer. This is Tom's work. This particular bench is currently on display in Philadelphia at the Center for Art and Wood, and I would encourage you to go visit. It's wonderful work, and that's a wonderful institution. And what I love about his work, like these particular forms, is, they're historical references, but just, the commentary he makes by, creating, it's functional, but is it really functional? And then also the surfaces are so wonderful, and his use of color, pattern, and the technique and the craftsmanship is top notch. It's another example of his work. I was also fortunate to take a workshop during the summer while I was a graduate student at Haystack Mountain School of Crafts. I took a workshop with this maker. Her name is Jenna Goldberg. She lives in Providence, Rhode Island. And I was interested in learning about her Graffito technique. So in this jewelry box, which is a bandsaw box construction, you can see the white outline around those flowers at the bottom. That has been carved out with a thin V gouge. And so that technique is similar to the technique that one would use in ceramics, where you apply a colored slip and then you cut through that colored slip. That's called Graffito. So I was interested in learning that type of mark making. And so I was able to learn from her. And as a result of taking that class, we became friends, and we're still friends today. And here's some more examples of her work. Just incredible. She's amazing at surfaces. Her background is in illustration, and you can really see how it aids her in this type of work. I was also able to take a workshop at Penland School of Crafts with Andy Buck and Russell Baldwin. This is Andy. He's a really nice man, as you can tell, in that big smile. And that's a sculpture of his that he's hugging. He teaches at RIT in Rochester. And this is his work. So what I have found very inspiring about his work is his ability to create these wonderfully round surfaces and these round forms and these beautiful lush surfaces. They're really quite remarkable. So when I graduated from graduate school in 2002, I applied for a couple of residencies. One was at Anderson Ranch Art Center, and one was at the Appalachian Center for Craft. And I was very fortunate to have been awarded both, but I chose to go to the Appalachian Center for Craft, which is in Smithville, Tennessee. I don't know if you can see my cursor moving on your end, but halfway between the big star and the first dot to the right that says Cookeville, that is about where the Appalachian Center for Craft is. I chose to go there because I'd never been to Tennessee. I'd never experienced time in the South. And then also the residency was a full year in duration. I had been to Anderson Ranch. I loved Anderson Ranch, but the duration of the residency was, I can't remember exactly, but I want to say about 3 to 6 months. And at that point in my life, I wasn't just picking up and going to a residency and then going back to San Diego. I was taking the next step. So I needed something that was a little longer in duration and something that might help grow experience that could lead to something else. And this particular instance is the Appalachian Center for Craft is a satellite campus of Tennessee Tech University. So I knew now that I had my terminal degree, the Master of Fine Arts degree, I would have the credential to be able to teach at the university and university level if there were opportunity. So because of that affiliation with the university, the duration of time, and it being a very well-equipped shop, I chose to go to Tennessee. So I arrived here at the Appalachian Center for Craft on August 15th, 2002, planning to be here for 1 year. And here we are in March of 2021, and I'm still here. I have found it to be a really wonderful place. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful part of the country. People are quite friendly. And more importantly, this place. I believe in the importance of craft and craft education. That is everything that happens at this place. So we're looking at an aerial view of the Appalachian Center for Craft. You can see the dark gray area at the very top. That is actually a lake, that's water. Clearly this is an older photo, probably from the 80s, but you can see how beautiful and lush it is. And you can see how it's kind of this little beautiful oasis. And it's an 87,000 square foot facility that is dedicated to craft and craft education. There's housing here for students and resident artists. There is a hot glass blowing studio, blacksmithing, small metals, hollowware, ceramics, fibers, woodworking, retail galleries, exhibition galleries, and just a beautiful location. This land is owned by the Army Corps of Engineers, and the university leases it from them. There are hiking trails that go down to the lake. So you can see it's a really beautiful place to be. And you might imagine why I've chosen to stay for this long. So here's another view of it. Over here where my cursor is moving, which I hope you can see my cursor moving, over there is where the craft center is. So you can see it's a really beautiful location.
You can't see your cursor.
You can? Great.
Just so you know.
Okay, good, thanks. Yep. So this is another view of the craft center. You can see it's kind of interesting architecture, kind of the wooden paneling sort of helps blend in with a natural environment. So when I got here, my work changed dramatically. I'd had those experiences of working with Jenna and the experience of working with Tom and Andy. And if you noticed in their work, one thing that is kind of unites their body of work is their strong use of color, line, and exaggerated form. So by this time, I had finished my thesis body of work. I had written about it. I had defended it in the oral defense. And I was kind of ready to take a more lighthearted approach to making. I wanted to explore the potential of color, of line, of proportion. And so I felt in many ways quite liberated because I could make whatever I wanted to make. I didn't have to justify it. I didn't have to explain it. I'm not criticizing that other process. I think it's incredibly important, but I was able to maybe explore things that maybe some might refer to as whimsy. So this was the very first thing that I made upon arrival in Tennessee. So you can see the surfaces are really heavily activated through this repetition of lines. These were round MDF discs that I sort of slathered on a thick coat of gesso, put them on the potter's wheel while the gesso was still soft, and incised those lines with the tip of a paintbrush. And then I accentuated them and amplified their appearance by adding a thin black glaze and then wiping it off of the surface so that you could see those little ripples as though it's like a rock or a pebble that's been dropped in water, and those little rings just radiate outwards. So this was the first thing I made, and that use of color and line and proportion has continued with me up until now. This is another one of the first pieces I made. I had worked a trade with the blacksmithing resident artist, and I had asked him to forge some wheel castings for me. And as a trade, instead of paying him money, he wanted to have a trade. And what he wanted was a box. So this was the box I made him. And I really loved the look of forged steel, but I didn't want to constantly owe him something from having him create forged steel objects for me. So I thought, well, if I can describe verbally the things I like about forged steel, certainly I can describe them visually. So those three little pegs at the top are actually wood that I've shaped and carved to mimic the illusion of hand forged steel. I started to become very interested in mark making on the surface. So, kind of going back to my experience of working with Jenna Goldberg at Haystack, I just started exploring the idea of making marks directly onto the surface. Also, at the same time as this, I had more opportunity to indulge myself in looking through books. Part of my job as a resident artist was to work in the library a couple hours a week. So I would just dive into the stacks and just look at these books that weren't about, techniques and furniture making, but painters like Robert Motherwell, painters like Cy Twombly, looking at the quilts of Gee's Bend and those wonderful syncopated patterns that are created from the placement of variations of a color next to each other and the stitch marks that are put on them. I also was able to visit a Gee's Bend quilt show in person. It was in Memphis during the first year of my residency. And those experiences, even though they weren't furniture related, heavily influenced what I was creating and the types of surfaces I was developing. So this is an example. This is a large scale mirror. It's almost 7 feet tall, so it's really large. The wall mirror, the wheels do spin so that you could roll it wherever you want along the width of a wall. I've become very obsessed with this pattern of lines and dots, and I can't help myself. I put them on everything I make almost. I love just this visual pattern that's created from them. There's no logic behind them. I squint my eyes and I look to see where I feel like I need to have some dots, and that's where I draw the lines, and that's where I put the dots. But I love how there's we read into pattern a language, so it's easy for us to look at this and start to want to make sense of it, as though it's some sort of visual Morse code, and there's a message that's hidden beneath there. If we just look hard enough, we might figure out what that message is. So these are the works I was creating. A lot of the works that I was creating, I was also teaching during this time period. So a lot of the works I might be creating are for invitational exhibitions. So this particular piece was for a show in Santa Fe, and the name of the show was Weather or Not, as in weather as in rain, snow, sun, sunshine, etc. And so I was thinking of seasons and fall, when the trees start to lose all of their leaves and things start to become quiet and things go to rest. And so this is a large kind of suggestive of a human figure, not terribly descriptive, but enough information that we read into it a figure. And it's about 3 feet tall. It's a bandsaw box construction. It's milk paint and more lines and dots and more faux forged steel. I also started playing around with children's furniture. Furniture making involves a lot of muscle and elbow grease, and sometimes I'm not a big person. Sometimes I don't want to make big things because then I have to schlep the things. And so I decided to explore children's furniture. It was kind of fun because you don't have to worry so much about ergonomics either, because children don't sit still long enough to be bothered by those things. Now, also during this time, I learned how to turn wood. In graduate school, we had a nice lathe, but nobody really knew how to use it. And so one of my perks of being a resident artist at the Appalachian Center for Craft is I could take a workshop from any of the instructors in the wood studio if there was an opening. I love being a student. I love learning new things. I love learning new processes. And it was a wonderful opportunity that I took full advantage of. So my first woodworking teacher, it was a weekend wood class. It was with Clay Foster. It was a green bowl turning class. It was wonderful. But I would say my real comprehensive learning happened from this man, Nick Cook. And it was a 5-day long workshop. And Nick is a production wood turner, and he is so good. And he's not only so good at wood turning, he's also so good at teaching it, and he's so generous with his knowledge and information. So I've developed a real love for Nick and his wife, Kathy, and they're my wood turning parents. And so even though I learned how to turn wood, I wasn't really interested in creating kind of traditional or, what's the word I'm thinking of, like a salad bowl necessarily. I was interested in using the technique as another form of expression and another way of sculpting a material and sculpting a form. So I became familiar with this artist's work while working in the library. Her name is Maria von Kesterin. I believe she's Danish, but I'm not positive. I should know that. I'll have to research it. But what I love about her work is just this celebration of form. It doesn't, it's a bowl, but it's not a standard bowl. I just love the sort of rotund, heavy surfaces, the simplicity of the form, the quietness, the sort of economy of it. Here's another of hers. So this is the type of bowl making I create. Again, I'm interested in it, like Maria von Kesterin, is maybe more of like a sculptural form versus a functional form. And, this is still functional. I mean, you could put, some M&Ms or jelly beans or something like that in that little concavity, but my interest is more in the surface, the roundness of the form and the relationship of those two. But I do also make more traditional turned forms. So I have a little footstool here. There's no reason why it can't have 6 legs instead of 4. I like to play around with variations on a theme. So I imagine those legs as all of those little beads kind of being like hula hoops, and everybody's hula hooping and their hula hoop is at different levels. Again, playing a lot with surface, a lot with color, and a lot of mark making. One of my favorite things, probably my favorite part of the process, is when I get to do the drawing on the form. I don't draw on a flat surface very often. That kind of terrifies me, the 2-dimensional surface. But for some reason, if I've got a 3D form, I'm just ready to go and draw on it. So these are little teapot boxes. These are, I call them tit for tat tables. It's a production line that I sell through the Artful Home. When I was a resident artist, I was faced with the reality of student loans and having to pay those back. And so I created for myself a couple little production lines to help grow income to pay off my student loans. And this is one of them. Again, just really playing with the surfaces. These are mahogany and poplar. This is another production line. I was doing demonstrations, wood turning demonstrations for Habitat for Humanity, and it was an outdoor demonstration, and it was a beautiful day. And there was a man who we were just chit-chatting, and he was driving his Harley. He'd come and talk to me, and then he'd go ride for a while, and he'd come back and talk to me. Well, I was just too busy gabbing, and I accidentally cut through the bottom of the bowl. And it was a nice piece of mahogany, and I was like, oh, darn it, what am I gonna do with that? And so I attached it to a backing board, and I created a mirror, and I thought, that's not bad. Well, it's not bad on accident. Surely it can be good on purpose. And so I figured out how I could do it on purpose. And so that's how this product line was developed. So I will oftentimes make multiples of the same form and then explore different mark making and coloration on it. It's as though it's a sketchbook, and I don't feel as afraid to mess up if I have multiples of it. So these are examples of that, variations on the theme. And they're about 20 inches in diameter. I call them an Oculus Mirror because they look like the oculus, or the opening the eye at the top of the Pantheon or any great classical dome. Playing just around with variations on the theme. So what happens if the tit for tat tables combine and conjoin and become triplets? And so this, although it looks like 3 separate tables, it's actually one table. All of the round parts are turned on the lathe. Well, every part of it is turned on the lathe, except for the very bottom black base, which is hand carved. And it looks like it's turned, but it was hand carved. It's just one long piece of poplar. Here's a detail, and it's called Odd Man Out because the guy in the middle, his little sock right here is a little lower than the others, and his lines at the top run perpendicularly to his neighbors. Now, where I am in Middle Tennessee, there are a couple of restored Shaker villages not too far from here. The biggest one, and probably one of the more well-known one, is Pleasant Hill in Kentucky, which is right along the Bourbon Trail. And I've been able to visit there multiple times, and I love it. It's an amazing place. All of these objects, are wonderfully crafted by hand. I love the sort of quietness, the economy of decoration and ornamentation. And so I've looked to these shaker villages and their forms as sources of inspiration, as sort of starting points for my own work. Like this beautiful little twig hanger. I mean, there's just something so wonderful about it, and its simplicity and honesty. This is at South Union, which is in Bowling Green, Kentucky, which is about an hour and a half from me. And so I made my own version of coat hangers, inspired by that little twig hanger that I saw. So this is the pair, South Union. I hired a blacksmith to forge the hardware for me. And then the forms themselves are turned from cherry and poplar. It's a detail. Another form inspired by simple shaker furniture is this blanket chest. It's solid cherry, and then the pattern on the panels of the inside version is a slightly smaller variation of the pattern on the outside. It's lined with aromatic cedar, and once I get started drawing, I just can't stop. So it's on all surfaces, inside, outside, backside. I was really fortunate in 2011 to be awarded the International Turning Exchange residency in Philadelphia, which is run through the Center for Art and Wood. There, I was surrounded by some really talented makers, like that woman in the background waving. That's Beth Ireland, who's a really good friend of mine. And I point her out because I think these experiences are super important to grow your network, to learn new people, but also to learn from new people. Beth has led her career as a production turner and carpenter. And we became really great friends, but I also learned so much from her, and she also learned from me. And I think getting out of our comfort zones and also being willing to learn from others is super important as an artist. So this is the work I was creating while I was there. I started this body of work that was inspired about or centered around the idea of home, house, what's the difference? What do these things do? And so this is about 4 feet tall, 5 feet tall, and it's this sort of tall totemic house-like form as though it's an obelisk. And then beneath it is this net that's constructed out of wire, and all of those small little houses represent memories, so sort of its capacity to preserve and hold and accumulate all of these experiences and memories. It's suspended from the wall from this little mahogany shelf. And then I took the idea of this large form that's created mostly out of air. The only thing that defines the form are those thin pieces of wire. And so I took that idea, but then created the physical heft and drew the net on with pencil. So this was a split turning. So initially it was fully round. And before I turned it, I glued the two halves together with a piece of paper in between them. So after I turned it, I could split the piece apart. That thin piece of paper basically splits into a thinner piece of paper, and you have two identical halves. And so these are wall-mounted shelves, little shallow shelves. The bottom part is poplar, this is cherry, and that's painted aluminum. So again, this idea of this small, humble abode with this huge capacity to store and accumulate a whole lifetimes of experiences. And then I've kind of played around with that house form in other works. Here's an example. I was thinking of Andrew Wyatt's painting, Christina's World, where you have Christina down in the foreground looking up at the house and, the house way up at the top of that hill. And so I imagine these as my version of that. So I have this heavily scarred surface, textured surface, where I've layered variations of greens on top of each other and sanded through. And these are bandsaw boxes, so they have these really irregular shapes. Little geode, the idea of this little geode opening up, you crack it open and you have all these gems. So these little houses are decoupaged with writings. I took a survey, gave a questionnaire to the other resident artists, and I took some of their writings and then I decoupaged them onto these little wooden houses. And then this is a table I created as part of I did a master apprentice program. I was a master artist and I worked with an apprentice artist. In this case, it was Ellie Richards. And this was organized through the Tennessee Arts Commission and Tennessee Craft. And so I worked with Ellie and was teaching her some about the basics of furniture construction. She designed and built her a table, and I designed and built my table, which is this table. And I am from Oklahoma. If you've ever been to Oklahoma, you know the horizon looks exactly like this, which is perfectly flat. There are a few areas in the Northeast that have a little bit of hills, but for the most part, it's really, really flat. And so I was imagining this table as like this great expanse of a horizon, which I love that openness. It seemed you don't feel contained. It's as if you can just run and run and run. And so I created this long, skinny table. The houses are not affixed so that the viewer or the participant can move those houses around however they wish. And in doing so, they're creating different relationships that also start to suggest a narrative. And then other variations on the theme. This I made while I was teaching a workshop at Penland, and that's a box on the top. I was thinking of the hillside, the knoll as it's called there at Penland. And I'm going to point out a few places that I have gone to and programs I've participated in because they've been pretty influential in terms of shifting me to new bodies of work. And they're just remarkable places in and of themselves. One is Haystack. I was awarded the Haystack residency, and Haystack is in coastal Maine. And I decided I would work on a small scale while I was there. I wanted to play around with form and color. And I would have to ship everything home that I made there if it was of furniture size. So I decided to focus on that exploration through brooches. So these are wooden brooches that you could wear on your sweater or lapel. And then I've played around with the idea of wooden wearables even further. So these are hand-carved bracelets that are painted with milk paint. And I love that kind of irregular, squishy, almost like they're irregular bagels, these nice big chunky, they're chunky, but they're lightweight bracelets. And then necklaces, just playing around again with form, materials, surface, color. And then I was awarded the John D. Mineck Furniture Fellowship. It was a huge honor, and it afforded me the opportunity to pursue a new body of work and also learning new techniques and technologies. One of the things I wanted to do was to recognize and celebrate a part of my heritage. My mom's side of the family is Native American, and I'm an enrolled member of the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma. So I have grown up around Seminole patchwork, which is what we're looking at now, but I never really studied it. I never really learned about it. Are there rules about combining motifs? Are there rules about combining colors, for example? So I was able to use that grant to go, or that fellowship to go home to Oklahoma and study and meet with makers of patchwork to find out a little bit more about it, to try to answer some of these questions that I had. I was interested in translating these motifs onto the surface of wood via a CNC router. So I took a 3-week-long studio intensive at the Anderson Ranch Art Center in Colorado to learn the CNC. In the end, I didn't like the way that the marks were translated, but I learned a lot from the technology. So this is one of the pieces I made while I was there. It's called Binary, and the walnut one on the right is 2 halves that were carved on the CNC and then glued together to create a 3-dimensional object, a fully 3-dimensional object. And the one on the left was done all by analog techniques using the lathe and hand carving. So it was kind of a celebration and critique simultaneously of technology. It's wonderful because you can build these forms quickly. It carves away a lot of material quickly. You know, I found it limited in the areas like these little round areas here. That diameter is always defined by the cutter head. Same for here. You also end up with this seam right here. But I think it's kind of an interesting sort of conversation that's happening between those two. And I also was able to take that research when I went to Purchase College. So I spent a semester at Purchase College, which is about an hour outside of Manhattan. And there I was able to take my research that I had done about patchwork and also the mark making with the CNC, the knowledge of me not really liking that type of mark making, and instead applied those motifs by hand. So these are some of the works that I made while I was at Purchase College that was inspired by the patchwork. So this is a demi-lune table, my version of a demi-lune table. A demi-lune table is the half round table. It's a kind of traditional form of furniture. And this is my variation on the theme. This motif here is the deer motif. We have a lightning motif here, and then just a decorative motif. And so these are two different sizes of split turning. So there was another one of this size and another one of this size. So I was able to create two of these demi-lune tables. And here is another. So we've got the turtle pattern here and the dragonfly pattern here. This one, oh, I can't remember. Oh, I think it's a diamondback. And then this one, I believe, is just an ornamental pattern. And this is a bird right here. And then these patterns here, if you remember back on the patchwork, they had colorful lines that separate the bands of patchwork, and that those it's usually rickrack. So that's my version of rickrack. These are little side tables. I actually use them at home next to my sofa. And then I made myself a bed. I needed a bed, so I made myself a bed. And you can see on the headboard, more variations of those patterns. So I've got turtle, deer, this is just an ornamental one, and this is called man on horseback. And this is cherry, and this is painted fiberboard. And then again, more variations on the theme. So I created more Oculus mirrors and then transferred those stylized patchwork motifs onto the surface. And then these are some pieces I've made in the last few years. I was in a show, a seating show, had chairs or benches. So this is a bench, a variation on that table that I made. And then here's another bench. I like the idea of this exaggerated number of legs. And then during COVID, I made myself a bed, or a table, a kitchen table. I needed a kitchen table, so I made myself a proper kitchen table. Recently, I've been kind of going back to some of my, I guess, ceramic background, but in a rigid material. So these forms I created while I was at the Vermont Studio Center, and I've been stuck on them. I'm not quite sure how to finish them. And they were incredibly laborious to make that would have taken a lot less time to make out of clay. But I love working with this material, this hard, rigid material that we associate with being rectilinear, but turning them into these organic, fluid objects. So I imagine these as sort of like a circle, and I'm pinching in here and seeing what happens. How is the form displaced when I pinch it in? And the same here, if I pinch it in a different place, what happens? And so I'm not quite sure how I'm going to finish them. They've been sitting around and I'm stumped. But I really like them as objects, and I really have appreciated working with the material in that fashion. Now, the next couple of images just talk about the idea of community, craft and community. For me, it's really important to become engaged in the community of craft. One way I've been able to do that is by participating in different collaborative events. This one is in Canada, Saskatchewan, Canada. This is Ness Creek, and this collaboration is Emma Lake. There, it's just kind of the Wild West free-for-all, and you grab something and you start working on it, and then you might talk to somebody and say, hey, do you want to do something to this? Do you have any ideas for this? And then these wonderful objects develop. So here I am painting the bottom of this bowl form. I'm also painting this object here, which is a collaboration with this artist. And then she's talking to this artist and figuring out what to do with another form. And what happens is you end up with these results that you never could have created on your own. So this portion here, this sort of U shape, I carved and painted. This was a blacksmith. This was a bit for a horse. The blacksmith bent it over and it created the hanging form. And then a basket maker from British Columbia, Joan Kerrigan, wove this bottom part. And so it's this wonderful conversation between the three of us to figure out how to create this one singular work that ends up being so much different and better than probably we could have created individually. Here's another variation. So I created the fat ring, and then Joan wove the portion down below. Here's another example from a different collaborative event. This is Echo Lake, which happens at Bucks County Community College. We had these random little pieces of mahogany, but it wasn't quite enough to make a full tabletop, and we didn't have enough. You kind of end up using whatever scrap materials are around. And so we just tried to figure out how to make the most mass out of these forms. So we have this implied mass, even though we have a lot of absences. And so this is a collaboration between myself and another furniture maker named Linda Van Gehutchen, who's based out of Pittsburgh. This is a collaboration from Frogwood in Portland, Oregon. This is a furniture maker named Michael DeForest, and he wasn't able to be with us that week. He had to help with a family member who was ill. And so I created the box, and then I handed it off to him to paint. And I had no idea how he was going to paint it, like what it would look like, but it's just this wonderful surface. I would never have chosen that hot pink and purple, but I love it. This is another collaboration. This is a brooch. So I carved and painted the wood. Another artist named Ron Gerton did a casting of this frond, and we created this brooch. I've also been able to participate in 2 World Wood Days, which is this wonderful international celebration of anything and everything wood. This year, it was in the year of this photo, it was in Long Beach, California. And so it's just this wonderful way to grow community and to support community. I was also able to do it in Austria a couple of years ago. This Japanese man, he runs the automata portion of World Wood Day, and he and his wife make these glasses, and I just love this photo. He's so nice. And this is our group from Austria. So you can see some familiar faces. Here's Michael DeForest that you saw a minute ago. Here's Andy Buck. Here's Tom Lozer. Here's Jenna Goldberg. And here's Wendy Mariyama. Just this wonderful community. And this is what I made while I was in Austria. So I was inspired by the shingles that are, oh shoot, I'm sorry. I thought I had a picture of the architecture. You can see the fence behind me that's all made out of wood and this wonderful patterns. Well, this is an open air museum. They've been able to preserve architecture that is unique to this area over these different eras. And they're all made of wood, and they have shingles that are made of wood, of these wonderful elaborate patterns. And so I was inspired by the patterns of the shingles, and that's how this particular piece was created. So this is painted wood. These are bandsawed, leaving the textured marks, painting layers of colors and sanding through to highlight the textures, and then adhered to the outside surface. Another big part of my creative practice and professional practice is teaching, not only in the academic environment, but also workshop institutions. I've been quite fortunate to have been invited to teach at a number of places. As a result, I have grown to know so many wonderful people, and we're all connected through craft and making. So this is me a couple of years at Penland. This was a 2-week class on table making. Coincidentally, these two met, this one and this one, during my workshop, and they recently got married. I love it. Here's one in Peters Valley a couple years ago. Really wonderful group of people. I've been able to stay in touch with a couple of them. Tammy right here, she actually ended up coming and taking a class from me in Maine. Will, I'm still in touch with, and I'm still in touch with Heather and also Carol. So I love that. I love that about the craft community. And then Haystack Mountain School of Crafts in Maine. And then at Aramont, I usually teach either wood turning or furniture making, go back and forth between the two. And it's just a really wonderful opportunity to share information, learn information, and meet new people. See, here's Tammy again. I've also been a part of this event called Pentaculum at Aramont, which is it's a 5-day residency. I was the wood studio coordinator for 3 years, and I was able to invite these artists to come together, and we work alongside each other over the course of a week. And we just have a good time. We learn from each other. We're inspired by each other, and I can't recommend it enough. Now, the last little few images I'm going to show you is our academic program at Tennessee Tech. I'm the director of the School of Art, Craft, and Design, and I believe really strongly in our students. I believe in the importance of education and also arts and crafts education. So like I mentioned to you before, at the Craft Center, we have these different studios. So the work that I'm scrolling through are all created by students during the course of study in our program. It's an undergraduate degree program. We offer a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree and a certificate, a non-degree certificate, craft certificate. What we really value in our program is a strong understanding of materials and technique. So our students really learn how to make things very, very well. They understand craft, they understand craftsmanship, they understand process, they understand integrity. And they leave here with such a solid set of skills, and they're just so impressive and so remarkable. The culminating experience for our students is a solo exhibition. So they conceive a cohesive body of work that's visually cohesive and also conceptually cohesive. We also try to teach our students some about entrepreneurism. We think that's a really important part of arts education. Is not only how to make it, but how to make it work for them. These are images from our art education program. So you can see how art and craft and education have really played a large role in my life and how it has led me to all sorts of wonderful things. And I'm incredibly grateful for this opportunity. I'm grateful and so proud of Peters Valley for all of the positive impacts they make in helping to promote craft education and inspire and enrich people's lives through it. So thanks very much. I'll stop sharing my screen so I can answer some questions.
That was awesome. Thank you. What a fantastic presentation. So if you have questions, please put them. There's a Q&A button at the bottom. And Kimberly, I do want to start. There was a question in the chat that if you could reiterate for anybody that came in late, what is the colored paint finish and the medium are the drawings with what is it? Yeah. What are you using?
I use milk paint. The brand that I typically use is old-fashioned brand milk paint. And then I draw onto the surfaces with pencil. And then I have to seal it with a spray finish. And Albert Lecoff chimed in, I saw, and told us that Maria von Kesterin is from the Netherlands, and he would know because he's the the former executive director, founder of I guess executive director emeritus of the Center for Art and Wood, and they have some of her work in their collection. Her work is beautiful.
So Bill Abendroth asks, I see a lot of similarity between your surface treatment and the work of Michael Husalik. Is that intentional?
No, it's not intentional, but I think we as artists, we see things and it enters into our subconscious, right? And so it can just happen. I can see the relationship between Michael's work and also like Cy Twombly, who I cited before. It's really just about this free, expressive, unrestrained mark making.
And Rich Howden asks also about a Nakashima influence.
I don't think so, at least not consciously. And I've not really looked a lot at Nakashima's work. I really like Nakashima's work, but I think I would say more consciously, I'm inspired by works that rely less on the natural naked beauty of wood, and also like a live edge isn't normally the direction I go, but Nakashima's work is absolutely stunning, of course.
And Rich also asked about your Oculus mirrors, like the sizes of them. And
they are 20 inches because I turn on a Powermatic in our wood shop here at the Craft Center. It's a 3520, or is it 3420? And so 20 is the limit of the diameter. So it's let's say 19 3/4 of an inch in diameter.
John Dugan asks, do you have plans on teaching classes outside of Tennessee this summer?
Well, I'm so glad you asked, John, because yes, I'll be teaching at Peters Valley this summer. I'm teaching a 5-day wood turning class at Peters Valley. I'm also teaching a 5-day table making class at Aramont and a 5-day wood turning class at Port Townsend School of Woodworking. So we're on opposite coasts this summer.
I don't know if anyone else has questions. Oh, Marcia just chimed in with a question. She wants to know, your line and dot technique is mesmerizing to me. How do you go about developing a pattern that is pleasing to your eye?
A lot of times it depends on the object. If it's a large object, like let's say the blanket chest, for example, what I will do oftentimes is I'll draw sketches of that blanket chest and then I'll Xerox it a few times and I create basically a coloring book. It's a line drawing, and then I get my colored pencils out literally and I color in, and then I just draw little variations on the theme so that I can figure it out ahead of time, because with something of that scale, it takes a long time to get it ready to put paint and color on. And so it would be irresponsible of me not to take those make those planning stages and take the time to figure out my game plan. So with something like that, I do a lot of planning with the smaller pieces, like the mirrors. I just kind of jump in. I just go for it. I have a general idea of a pattern I might like to use. And I look at spacing between them. Does it look like it has too much space? If so, I need to put in another little line or a dot or a motif. I guess it's a balance between improvisation and planning. And like I said before in the slide presentation, there's not really a whole lot of logic to it. I'm looking at a visual rhythm and sort of looking like, okay, this feels like I need a few more dots over here. And so then I just put in a few more dots.
So Jack is asking, how is the wood joined?
I'm not sure which piece you're referring to, but I did learn traditional forms of woodworking. So, you know, in like at the tables, I use mortise and tenon. In the blanket chest, I think there's like 30 mortise and tenons in there, because the mortise and tenons that hold the panel in from the frame, and then the frames that go to the side parts. So it's all traditionally joined. I use traditional joinery in all of it.
So Rich is asking, will you make a larger size mirror for sale, customized? But is that possible if you just said that you use the maximum?
It is possible. You can turn off of the end of the lathe. I haven't tried it. I'm not opposed to trying it, but I don't want to make a commitment to you right now.
Kurt is asking, in your Oculus mirrors, for example, what's your technique for keeping the crisp paint line between the black inner and outer circles and the colored middle circle?
What I usually do when I'm turning it is I use like a long fingernail grind detail gouge, and I try to cut in like just, you know, this nice kind of sharp edge, and I just am very careful. Sometimes I mask it off. If I just want to be sloppy and lazy, I might mask off the edge with tape so it's a really clean, sharp line. But for the most part, I just try to really be careful and patient. You can also take a pencil, like a pencil line, a really sharp pencil, and draw down in that little crevice, and that can kind of help mask off any irregularity that exists. I'm reading the questions. I see.
Are you reading them too? Okay.
Yeah, Larry Zara asks about distinctiveness in work and advising students to find their own voice. It's a really hard thing. It takes a long time, I think, to find your own voice and to find your confidence to find your own voice. I think you have to just make a lot. You've got to make a lot of mistakes, and you've got to make some ugly work in the meantime. Like the work I did in grad school, now it has nothing to do with what I make. And sometimes I'm even afraid to show it because it's so incredibly different than what I make. But I also think it's really important for people to understand that making and finding your voice is a journey, and that it takes a long time. So I think asking pointed questions of students, asking a student to explain their rationale for making a design decision is really important. And it encourages them to not only become better at describing things verbally, it also forces them to reconcile internally their decision making and why they do this instead of that. But I think it's a really difficult thing, and it takes a long time, and it's a struggle. Yes, I do paint while I'm on the lathe if I can. I can't always paint things on the lathe. Like the Oculus mirrors, I can't really paint those on the lathe because the way that they're constructed, I can't really paint them on the lathe. But if I can paint on the lathe, I try to paint on the lathe. And here at school, we have 9 Powermatics. And so sometimes if I'm doing like a little production or I'm running on a deadline, I can come in early in the morning because usually students don't arrive early in the morning on the weekend. And I can set up a part on one lathe, another part on another lathe, another part on another lathe. And I can paint this one. And by the time I've worked my way around to this one, the paint's dry on the first one, and it speeds up the process. So I try if I can paint on the lathe. Do I produce blanket chests? You had it painted when Lancaster Company produces something similar. I'm not exactly sure what your question is, but I've only built the one blanket chest. As of today, on March 24, 2021, I do not intend to make, maybe if I were to make another blanket chest, maybe only 1 or 2. Like I mentioned before, I'm not a big person, and the blanket chest is big and heavy, and it's difficult for me to move around. And so I kind of now prefer working in about, a 3 foot by 3 foot scale.
And John Sheridan's asking, do you see the craft galleries coming back after so many have closed? Retail opportunities are sketchy now for makers to support themselves.
That's a really good question. I don't know that I have a great answer. I do hope that craft galleries come back, but I do think that there are expanding avenues for people to market and sell their work. Online primarily. I think there's new ways to market work through social media. I don't know. I really don't know. I think if so, I think craft galleries have to assume more responsibility in employing and capitalizing the internet and social media.
And I don't know if anyone else has questions. We answered all the ones in the Q&A. So now is your chance if you have a question to ask. And I think there were some lovely compliments coming in the chat as well.
Can I just tell Carol Palzer hi? I see her out there. She was in my class a couple of years ago, and she's just wonderful. And hi, Kristen. Well, thank you, everybody.
All right. Well then, thank you, Kimberly. This was an incredible presentation. And we will be posting this on the Peters Valley YouTube channel within a few days. It's also going to be on our Facebook page immediately after this because it was on Facebook Live. So if you want to watch it again or share it, please share it out. That would be great. And thank you.
Thank you, Brianne, and thank you, Rachel. I really appreciate y'all inviting me to be a part of this program. I think it's really important, especially during these times, to still continue to support the community in this way. So I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Well, have a wonderful night,
Thank
everyone.
you.
And thank you, Rachel, for all your behind the scenes work.
Of course. Thank you, Kimberly. That was wonderful.
Thank you. See y'all later.
Take care.
Thank you so much for tuning in. We would like to thank our sponsors for making programs like this possible. If you liked this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel to receive more like it in the future.